Welcome to the Good Mood Show. I'm your host, Matt O'Neill. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you get a good mood every single week. Today, we're talking with my good buddy, Dante DiBattista. He's a best-selling author, a leadership coach, and an inspirational speaker. Dante was actually named one of the 8 top leadership coaches to follow by LA Weekly, and he's on a mission to make the world a better place by building leaders that will build the future. Dante, welcome to the Good Mood Show.
Thank you, Matt. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Man, I appreciate you deeply for being here, and our listener will too. And specifically, what you're going to learn from today's show is how emotions are just data. They're not directives. Couldn't be a more relevant topic for leading your own life. But Dante's going to talk to us about how this actually helps us in a leadership position with others. And we all have leadership positions, whether you know it or not, just your group of friends, you lead those conversations. Dante is also going to teach you how to analyze the data from your emotions so that it increases your happiness, your success, and your well-being. And he's offering a free gift. If you go to thegoodmoodshow.com and subscribe to our newsletter, we're going to give you the first 2 chapters of his best-selling book, The Transformational College Experience. Or you can just reach out on our contact page and we'll send it over. But Dante, man, you didn't start out as this leader of leaders.
No, not even close.
You actually shared with me that that at a younger age, you were branded as a failure.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to high school, I graduated in the bottom 25% of my high school class. Early in my childhood, my teachers would tell my parents that, and rightfully so, by the way, I'm not criticizing teachers, that I was one of the smarter kids in the class. I just wasted my time. I didn't pay attention. I wouldn't bring a backpack home. I didn't read the textbook. I didn't pay attention, take notes. I did not take advantage of the opportunity. And a lot of teachers were concerned, and rightfully so. And I would say early on, there were a lot of people that overlooked me as a result of my own behavior, and I accept full responsibility for that. But it was later in life when I went to college. I went to the only school that gave me a scholarship and failed out miserably. And I had this thought process when I was younger. I was like, you know what? Like, I'm going to prove all these teachers wrong. I'm going to prove everyone wrong. When it matters, I'm going to be able to just flip this switch and just do it. And all of a sudden, the opportunity was right in front of me and the switch never flipped. And I realized, even though I had all the potential in the world, you can't just flip a switch. You have to build the right habits. And I didn't have the habits. I didn't have the attitude. And so I failed out of college and I went back with a whole new approach. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to have to learn how to actually study. I was always a smart kid that could sleep through class and get C's. And I was okay with that. And it was when I failed out of school, went back and kind of took this whole new approach of, you know what, I'm just going to kind of blow up this whole idea of who I am and rebuild. Like, what does it mean to be me? And
This is
talk a little bit about this.
this is such an interesting idea that you had mentioned, that you had this belief that you could prove everybody wrong if you only turned it on.
Yep.
And then you had an opportunity to turn it on, and you actually didn't prove everybody wrong. You came crashing down on your face with failing out of college. A lot of times when I'm not succeeding at something, I have the same thought. Like, well, if I really tried, I'd be good at it. If I really applied myself, I could do it, but I'm not applying myself. I think that's a big cop-out that I take myself to. Is I'm kind of afraid to apply myself fully, because if I apply myself fully and then I fail, I never actually was good enough.
And I want to that's exactly what we're going to talk about in terms of reframing the conversation. I had to redefine what failure meant to me. And I said earlier, and you introduced it properly, that I was branded kind of as like this failure, like the kid's just a waste of potential. He has all the natural gifts. He can do whatever he sets his mind to. He just refuses to. And I think for me, exactly what you said, if I don't try, I can't fail. With any result that we get that is not quite what we wanted, we can just use the excuse that we didn't try. You're right. It absolutely is a cop-out. And it's also about this idea that we fear the results. We fear failure. And that is when when I talk about this a lot in my book. Being branded a failure earlier in life gave me the freedom to never fear failure. Like I'm already a failure in everyone else's mind. Why does it matter anymore? Right. So that almost gave me the freedom to do what I do now, which is explore fearlessly. I try things, I go out on a whim. And even when people are like, yeah, I don't see this working out very well for you, I do it anyway because I have no fear of the consequence. And it's allowed me to do things that everyone else originally thought wasn't possible. I I have a funny story that I have an older brother that went to college before me, and he went to a school called Towson University. It's right outside of Baltimore, Maryland. And I went to go visit him. I was 15 years old, a sophomore in high school. He's a freshman in college. I'm partying with my brother at college as a 15-year-old. So you can kind of see how this whole mentality came about, right? Not because of my brother, but because my priorities weren't straight, and I saw the weekend version of college and assumed that's what college was. And we were at Towson, and he takes me into Baltimore, and we go to a party at Johns Hopkins. And I was like, oh man, Johns Hopkins is my dream school. And he's like, you'll never get in. And at the time, he was right. I mean, I graduated the bottom 25% of my high school class. No one in the bottom 25% of the high school class gets into Johns Hopkins. Years later, I fail out of college. I go back, I have this transformational experience, and I tell the story in the book. But I joined Teacher America after I graduated college, and they have a partnership with Johns Hopkins. So I got my master's in organizational leadership from Johns Hopkins. So I
Ooh.
got to prove them wrong, right? And I'm not saying that to disrespect my brother. It's just funny. Like people doubt you, and going back to this whole emotions or data thing, it is upsetting when people doubt you. But at the same time, are you really upset at them, or are you upset at yourself for giving them enough evidence to come to that conclusion? And
Mm.
at what point are you going to accept responsibility for that? You can't control what they think, but you can control the information they have access to. And the information they have access to is your behavior and how you treat them and how you approach life. And if you have people in your life who depend on you or have trusted you, and you've broken that trust because you've refused to accept responsibility for your behavior, are they wrong? And the answer is no. You've given them enough data. And at some point, we have to accept responsibility for that. So when it comes to what we talked about, the emotions are data and not directives. Whenever you find yourself getting upset, I know for me, whenever I get frustrated, I feel immediately like I'm being attacked, and I have to attack the other person in return, right? Suddenly, this conversation is a battle and you're my adversary. Instead, what are they actually communicating to you? They are communicating that based on what they've seen, they feel like there's enough data for them to come to the conclusion that you are not trustworthy and that you are not going to perform based on how they need. And they're only sharing, if someone gave you a spreadsheet with numbers on it, would you get offended if the numbers were there? The answer is probably no. But we act like the emotions are a separate thing and words are a separate thing, but we're doing the same process. We're going through some type of data analysis. It's a little harder to quantify, but we're going through the same data analysis, coming to conclusions and sharing our conclusions. I know you as a real estate person, if someone's like, hey, I want to buy a rental property. Okay, cool. Let's run the numbers, and the numbers don't come up. Would you be offended that the numbers didn't come back appropriately? No, it has nothing to do with you. It's not a reflection of who you are at the core of who you are. It's a reflection of the data that's available. But you do have a sense of responsibility and ownership over the data that you share with other people based on your behavior.
No, it's powerful. And what I love is it emotions are not like clear black and white like a spreadsheet is. And the way that you've recontextualized emotions is a way that kind of takes the sting out of it. That, hey, if someone thinks negatively about me, they have a right to think that way. And what are the data points that I've given them to create that negative opinion, fair or not fair? And so now it's when I take responsibility for the way that they see me, I can now do something about it. I'm not a victim to the way they see me. I have control over the way people see me because I can change my actions and I can give them new data. And then they could take the new data and make a new opinion if they wanted to.
I would also add that different people weigh different data points differently. So I want you to imagine it being like an algebraic equation, right? The data you give is the X. but I might think that this certain set of behaviors has a multiplier of 4. So now every time I add an X, it's a big deal. But someone else might say, well, that thing, whatever it is, isn't a big deal for me. So how they value some of those behaviors is different. So if Matt sees something I do and thinks it's a bigger deal than I think it is, and he's upset by it, he's not wrong. We just have different value systems. We approach things differently. Our mathematical equation, how we analyze this data as we talk about, is just different. And why would that personally affect me? Why would I be offended by that?
Yeah, to give a concrete example here, I was 4 minutes late getting on this Zoom. Now, to some people, being 4 minutes late could have a 4x multiplier of this guy is not consistent, this guy's inconsiderate, this guy's not responsible, right? All from being 4 minutes late, where you didn't give me a hard time about being 4 minutes late to our Zoom at all. So possibly being 4 minutes late isn't a huge thing to you, although it wasn't my preference. I would have liked to have been earlier on time to show you how much I respect you. So just to give like a piece of real life to this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. And the funny thing about that is I'm the same way when it comes to time. I'm one of those people that I know you're incredibly busy. I'm incredibly busy. Sometimes I run a couple minutes late. It happens. And I personally don't get upset about it at all. But if someone grew up in an environment where time is everything, they grew up with like a military family, they went into the military themselves. If you're not early, you're late, all of those things, different value systems. And that's why I think it's so important to understand that, like exactly like you said, people value things differently. And it's completely okay. If someone's upset with you, they have a right to be upset with you.
Let's just
And you
play
don't
with
have to
this.
take it personally.
So yeah, what if you really were upset with me, like really upset?
Yeah.
And the entire conversation had a tone that had an undertone of I had disrespected you. That if you then came at me with some type of aggression, I could get upset with you that you're like not chill. Like, hey man, Dante, why aren't you chill out, man?
Yeah.
I was trying to get on the Zoom, but Zoom like needed me to authenticate this thing, and I went to my phone to do it, and like it was a back and forth thing, and I could have been super defensive and trying to explain it with you, but then if what you're recommending here is that the upset, if in this hypothetical, would be I could look in the mirror and say, man, I could have tried to open that Zoom 5 minutes early. Right? I gave Dante a data point of I was late, and him being upset is data to me that I could take my appointments in a higher serious way to make sure that I'm on time, because as soon as I take responsibility for it, I can no longer really be upset that you're upset.
There you go. And another thing you can do, just to hope I'm not giving away like secret information, but you send out a form before you're with your interviewers, right? The people you're interviewing. So you could have on there, are you the kind of person that, that cares about, like, you could literally include it on your form, and now And another thing you can do maybe is set 15 minutes earlier in the future for your own appointments, right? And make sure you have nothing that backs right up. You have like a 15-minute window, right? So the reason we talk about this is not because I'm not at all offended. It's more about when you do that, you accept responsibility and you focus on, okay, how can I be better? Instead of saying, oh, this person should just be more chill. How can I be better? And the world is an algorithm that returns results to you. And you have to get better, all of us. This is me included. This is how I approach the world. Understanding the world's an algorithm, and it returns results to you. And you have to learn how it dissects those results and how you can better interact with whatever this algorithm is. And
Yeah.
another example,
Go ahead.
Another example is how we met, right? You and I literally set a goal that I want to be on the Good Mood Show. I follow you on LinkedIn. I'm a big fan. And I live in the Charleston area, so I drive around and I see those Matt O'Neill signs, right, on properties for sale. See the billboard, the Matt O'Neill billboard, and I'm like, man, like I got to get to know this Matt O'Neill guy, right? And I trusted the process. I knew that as I continue to network within the community, as long as I get involved in certain groups, like the Champion Tribe, for example, there would be a day where our paths cross, and sure enough, it did. Right. So I think understanding that, when you set goals and you're intentional and you know that things don't just fall in your lap, that if you trust the process, continue to constantly improve however you see fit, you will eventually get to that place. And just, again, trusting the process, trusting the algorithm, and handling and controlling only what you can control.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story of the power of intention. And it's crazy the way these goals manifest. I met Chris Singleton the exact same way. I had the intention of interviewing him, and lo and behold, a friend of a friend knew Chris and brought us together after I set the intention of meeting him. It's very interesting the way that the world bends to these intentions. But once it kind of the opportunity presents itself, you have to be courageous. Because in that moment, when you and I were hanging out and we were talking in the champions group together, you said, hey, Matt, I've got a podcast. I'm a leadership coach. I think I'd bring a lot to the Good Mood Show. Can I be on the show with you? And it was in a course. However, if you hadn't had been brave enough to mention it, you could have shrunk down from that opportunity, right?
Absolutely. And that's where the fear of failure comes into play. If you fear the result, like if you said no, if you were like, or maybe instead of you just going right saying no, maybe you ask some questions. Okay, you have a podcast. Cool. How many listens does your podcast have? And if I gave you an answer and you said, sorry, that's not enough, like I find my time more valuable than that, then I would have to accept that no and say, you know what, that's because I didn't put in the work on my podcast. I'm going to, over this next year, I'm going to focus more intention on to grow it. And then next year, I'm going to find Matt O'Neill again. Like he's not getting away from me,
It's
right?
just a data point.
It's just a data
It's just a
point.
data point. The emotion though of that failure. The data point is this emotion of like, it's like a gut punch, like, oh, I'm not good enough, but it's just data. I love
Yep.
it. So
I'm not good enough yet.
you are a leadership coach. And one of the first things I said, hey, what do you teach when you teach leaders? And the first thing you said was emotional well-being. Why do you focus on emotional well-being first as you're coaching leaders?
Because I firmly believe, and there's a ton of research behind this, that the emotional well-being and the mental health of leaders trickles down to employees and those they lead. And I say employees because I work heavily in corporate environments, but we also work in schools. So this goes to students. We work within communities, so government leaders and their constituents, whatever the relationship is. I think we understand that this applies, cross-functionally. But the
What about
mental
as a
health and
parent, right?
or as a
As
parent, and it's
a parent, I'm leading
exactly,
my children,
yeah.
or as a friend, I'm leading my friend group.
Absolutely. So the reason I talk about that is because if I, as a leader, focus on my mental health and I focus on the things that empty my bucket and find ways to patch those holes and get better at identifying things that are maybe weaknesses, or I hate this word because it's kind of become politicized, but triggers for me, things that, for example, we'll go back to the time thing. I maybe grew up this is not true for me. It's just a hypothetical. Maybe I grew up in an environment where I was raised by military parents. I went into the military. I have this
Let's go
whole
into one of
life.
your actual triggers, Dante. What is a real
Okay.
trigger for you?
Because of my background and my experience, I still struggle when people doubt me. And I talked about this earlier, it's just a data point and they have every right to feel that way. But at the same time, a trigger for me truly is when people doubt me, because I know that I'm not one to be doubted. I know I'm not. And and this is the other thing that kind of contradicts itself, but I enjoy saying it anyway. I also believe on the flip side of this coin that every person deserves to believe in themselves so heavily that there's no amount of data that will ever cause them to doubt themselves. You truly deserve to be unconditionally loved by yourself. And I bring that every single day. No matter how many times I say no, no matter how many times someone tells me no, I will never doubt myself. But it is a little bit of a trigger for me. So when people doubt me, I do find myself a little frustrated with them, but I never stop believing in myself as a result.
Well, I
So
agree.
yeah,
Your soul is unlimited.
yeah,
The potential in each human being and the potential of the person listening to this episode is unlimited. Maybe I haven't put in the work yet to achieve whatever goal I have that I want to achieve, but I have the potential to truly move mountains.
100%. And the funny thing is, when I talk a little bit about my college experience and how I got into leadership development, I had a mentor. He was the director of this leadership institute we had on campus. And we had organizations sending people from all over the world to come learn from this man. And he was just on our campus, and I got the chance to meet him and talk to him, and he kind of took me under his wing. And we had this the certificate you can get on campus. And at the end, you have to create your own leadership philosophy. And my leadership philosophy is to perceive no limits. I firmly believe in that. And so going back to the whole mental health and well-being thing is I truly believe there are no limits, but the only way we can truly test that is if people remain committed, and emotional well-being drives their level of commitment. When we talk about employee engagement in companies, we talk about emotional investment into the mission of the organization. When someone comes to work and they just want to collect a paycheck and go home, there's nothing wrong with that. They want to collect a paycheck to provide for their families. Their emotional investment is predicated on supporting their family. And that's completely okay. But you have to make sure that you understand that and talk to them about, hey, we know you're here to support your family. We admire and respect that. In order for us to help you support your family, we need to make sure that we're stable, that we're profitable. Once we start losing profit, we can't keep everyone. So we need you invested in our results so we can help you continue to support your family, right? So understanding how this whole ecosystem and the emotional investment people have with the mission of whatever it is they're working on determines how hard they're willing to work and how much they're willing to go through. Persistence, right? The persistence is predicated upon hope. And again, emotional well-being. We talk about burnout, right? Emotional well-being is the medicine, the burnout. If you keep that emotional well-being, people don't get burnout. It's when they're absolutely emotionally exhausted, drained, fatigued, and no longer feel committed to the mission.
Yeah, I agree. Burnout is an emotion, or as you're saying, the draining of positive emotions, and all of a sudden we're burned out. I could be working harder than I've ever worked in my life and not feel burned out in the slightest because I'm like committed and excited about what I'm doing. You know, we could be pulling 12-hour shifts, and if I'm like super excited about it, there's no burnout. Or I could be kind of mailing it in, working kind of 4 hours of an 8-hour day, but just hating what I'm doing and feel burned out on that less amount of work. And it's this emotional well-being. So it's, as a leader, prioritizing our own emotional well-being. How do you do that yourself? How do you increase your emotional well-being outside of work?
I'm a very introspective person. I do a lot of journaling and reflecting. And I also set goals with everyone in my life, with my wife, with my family, with my friends. And I'm very open to being vulnerable. This kind of goes back to that lack of fear of rejection. I have no problem sharing how I'm feeling, what I'm going through, and asking for support. And I've noticed, and I do this a lot with leaders too. Leaders will say, "Oh, I have this goal. Like, I want to be better at communicating with my team." I said, "Okay, the first thing you're going to do is the next team meeting you have, you are going to tell everyone on your team, everyone, I want to get better at making sure your voice is heard. My challenge to you is that the next time I'm in a meeting and you find me talking over someone, I want you to raise your hand and remind me that I'm failing to meet my goal. I want you all to hold me accountable." Now, all of a sudden, your team's looking around. At first, they're going to be afraid to speak up. It's going to take a while for the first person to do it. But once that first person does it and you reward it, you'll have an army of people who are dedicated to helping you get better in the way that you want to get better. And
This is
all
a
of a sudden,
courageous person, though. Not
yeah,
everyone's ready for that level of accountability.
of
Someone
course
who
not.
values pride and being seen as perfect over the humility and the courageousness to know that we all have things to work on. They could say that to their team, and then the first person speaks up, they still bite their head off and say, "How dare you challenge me in front of
Yeah.
everybody?"
Yeah. And this is where we go back to digging deeper into the roots that have created our value system and why we feel that way. I had on the intro to my podcast, I talk about this illusion that it's lonely at the top. I'm sure you've heard that phrase. A lot of people have heard that phrase. And one of the reasons I work with with leaders is to address that feeling and where it comes from. And sure, sometimes being a leader, it does feel like you're on an island. You're accountable for everything all the time. And you also have this kind of standard that you have to be seen as perfect, because if you're seen as imperfect, everyone's going to start questioning why you're the one that leads them. Right. But I personally believe this idea that it's lonely at the top kind of facilitates this thought process that to reach the top, I have to be lonely. Right. You kind of think about the chicken or the egg, and people start isolating themselves.
Mm.
And so they start suffering in silence. And because they suffer in silence, they come into work overwhelmed. They struggle to sleep at night. So now they're exhausted and overwhelmed. They come into work and they have meetings. They receive the slightest bad news because they're tired and they're overwhelmed. They're impatient. They snap at one of their teammates because they snap at one of their teammates. Now the teammates are upset. No one's performing. You see this negative cycle.
That isolates you even more. And
Yeah,
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that's creating loneliness.
that's exactly right.
Wow. The other thing you had mentioned before this show is a really interesting topic, and it's authority is dangerous. Why do you say that to the leaders that you coach? Authority is dangerous.
Absolutely. So everyone who ever took like a psychology 101 course has heard of examples of things like the Stanford prison experiment, right? That's just one example, but there's another
Tell me,
experiment.
I'm not familiar. What's the Stanford prison experiment?
No way. All right. I'm so happy. So there's a great book I request that everyone looks into. It's not my book. It's called The Lucifer Effect by Dr. Philip Zimbardo. And so the Stanford prison experiment became very popular. So I forget what year this was run. I think it was like in the 70s. A professor of psychology at Stanford had this idea of an experiment. Students volunteer to be participants. And what happens is they split these subjects up into two groups: I'm sorry, prison guards and prisoners. And they're all students, they're all peers. And it's probably over a summer where they have a break. And so then they go and collect these students and they assign them these roles. And these are normally well put together. I mean, they're Stanford students, right? They're high performers. They're, pretty well collected individuals. And they assign them prison guard roles and prisoner roles. And you watch how their behavior changes the moment they're assigned these roles in this authority structure. The people who have power feel like it's their responsibility to exert their power on those they have power over. Because they exert their power in a certain way, prisoners respond, they resist. Because they resist, the power structure, the people in power are offended and feel the desire to exert more power. And so all of a sudden you find these well-collected people turning into absolute monsters. And it's wild to see how you
What did
take
they
people
do?
and put
What
them.
were some of the examples that the prison guards did to the prisoners, or that the prisoners did to the prison guards?
They would lock them in closets for days at a time.
No,
Yeah.
for days at a
Yes.
time?
Days at a time. Right. They would start doing like hunger strikes. They would try to like overthrow and escape. They turn into literal prisoners. And these are, again, people you look at as like, now, mind you, I also want to point out the cultural implications. They are all students. They're all men. They're all young. They all happen to be of a certain demographic, right? So there are elements where you could point out that you brought a very certain type of person and put them in a very specific situation. There are other examples. I want to tell you another quick story. The Milgram experiments. So Milgram was a professor and he wanted to study how well people listen to authority and why. So what they did is they brought a group of subjects in and they told subjects they might either be a tester or they might be tested. So what they did was they told a person, okay, you're going to be a tester and this other person is the person you're going to test. So they go into two separate rooms, but the tester wasn't real. Now the tested wasn't real, and I'll explain that in a second. So they go into two separate rooms. One person's in a room in front of a switchboard, and they have the professor in a white coat taking notes. And what they told the tester they were going to do is every time the person they were interviewing gets a question wrong, they would ask them a basic question. Every time they got the question wrong, you had to shock them. And every time they got it wrong, you would turn it up and keep shocking them at increasingly higher voltages. And what happened was the person that they said was they were testing on never went into a room and never got shocked. They just had a pre-recorded audio. So they hear this person slowly screaming louder and louder from these shocks. And the whole goal was to say, we want to see how shock therapy impacts learning outcomes. Well, just having a person in a white coat telling people to shock someone in increasingly higher rates, they got to the point where they would have shocked someone to death because someone in a white coat told him to do so. So the reason I bring that up is up to 70% of the population, if put in a situation where an authority figure told them to torture someone to death, would do it.
Yeah, this is Nazi Germany to me.
Yep.
Is
So
that we had an entire culture, and not every single person who was German at that time was a bad human being. And yet so many people followed authority to do atrocious things to other people.
yep. And there's a book called The Anatomy of Malice that talks about that. And the reason I'm sharing, I have a good mood show and it sounds like I'm being a depressor. The reason I share all of this is because I want leaders to understand how important their position is and why these fears, this ego-driven fear of being seen as imperfect, is going to cause them to behave in a way that could prevent people who need to speak up to save us from making monstrous decisions.
Mm.
They remain silent.
This is what you mean by authority is dangerous. And also going back to that point where you're coaching the leader to be vulnerable and ask his team or her team to tell me when you see something that I can improve upon, that's a really powerful way to not abuse our authority. I was just talking with somebody this morning about the Me Too movement, and how this is the symptom of how we abuse authority.
100%.
And that it's really a human thing. That, oh, we were talking about doctors. And he's the guy I work with was just used to work at hospitals, and he said some doctors would let the power go to their head and abuse their power. And he said, and then there were some virtuous doctors who really were committed to being incredible human beings, but it was probably what you're saying, 70-30. 70% of the people that he was working with were egomaniacs, and 30% were humble servants of the people they were leading.
Yeah.
So how do
And
we become a humble servant and not let the authority go to our head?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. I believe leadership is an act of service. And this is why I love leadership coaching. I believe why I'm so driven to do what I do. I believe the quality of leadership we live today determines the quality of life our kids live tomorrow. And that's why I think it's so impactful and so important. So going back to the question, how do we become more humble servants? I think we have to reward humility far more often. I don't think our society does that. Going back to how me failing in school, I think made me a better leader and a better person. We teach students that failure is something to avoid. We teach students that they have to get it right. They have to get it right the first time.
Yeah, we also
And
hoist up these people who perform super high with low integrity as the heroes of our world.
100%.
I mean, the New England Patriots won 6 Super Bowls, and we say they're the greatest team that ever played, and yet they were also caught deflating footballs and stealing signs from other teams. But we're still anointing them as the greatest franchise in football history with the greatest coach and the greatest quarterback combination, rather than saying, actually all their championships really aren't that big of a deal because they did it by breaking rules. Same could be said for many athletes who have personal integrity issues behind the scenes. We still say, oh, they're the greatest of all time. It's like the person who gets all A's but is a terrible human being, we're saying they're the best student in the school and celebrating them. The whole system is based on performance in the eyes of others rather than who you are as a person.
In the eyes of authority figures.
Yes.
Not peers.
Yeah.
And this is where I think education needs to be reframed as how to become a good human being, not just a good student. And we'll think about organizations. Organizations started implementing 360 feedback, right? Now there's pros and cons to 360 feedback. There's ways to do it and do it well and get the results you want, but there's also ways where you can try it, but the culture of your organization ultimately determines how well it's going to be implemented and how well people actually stick to it. But we don't do anything like that in school. There is no sense of, peer-to-peer feedback. There is no, there's
actually the teachers get tenure and then you can't touch them.
Yeah.
Man, I had a teacher that really didn't care. and she had tenure.
Yep.
And I remember thinking, man, like I'm getting nothing from this class. And yet there's nothing we can do about it as students. She has no accountability.
Yep. No, I agree with you. Absolutely 100%.
Um, so as we grow into these leadership positions, and it's really important then to stay humble and realize what Spider-Man said: with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes, sir. That's absolutely true. And I think in terms of moving into leadership roles, I did this exercise with you before we start recording. I kind of want to do it again. When we talk about organizational structures, I want you to imagine this is like an org chart, right? People look at the bottom and then you slowly see climb the ladder and you reach the top. When you look at an org chart, it looks like a ladder to climb, steps to climb. But what I tell people is an org chart is on a two-dimensional piece of paper. If you lay it flat, no one's above anyone. An org chart is an arrow. It's the person who's at the point of it gets to determine the direction we go in. People at the back are the one driving it. They're the ones that are pushing the arrow, right? So understanding that when you move up, you don't actually move up. You move toward the front. And that going back to this kind of analogy that, leadership is lonely and there's all this accountability. If you think about pointing, if you point a plane in the wrong direction by like 5 degrees and let it go for a few hours, you can end up in a different country, right? So if a leader is off just by a little bit and going in the wrong direction just a little bit, it does have incredible implications. But that's also why you need to be listening to everyone behind you who's saying, hey, it looks like we're going in the wrong direction, right? And that's why it's so important, again, because they see from a wider view.
It takes humbleness and humility to receive and request that feedback and then to listen to it. Boy, this has been a powerful conversation. And I know that you had said that you've got an exercise that can help the listener today just improve their mood a little bit. And it's the exercise is how to reframe conversations. So let's say we have a negative conversation with somebody. How would we reframe that conversation?
If, let's say it's you and I, if Matt and I are having a conversation and we get into some sort of conflict, I always remind everyone it is not you versus me, it's us versus the problem. We're on the same team. So instead of saying, you know what, Matt, I'm mad at you because you said this to me and I feel like you attacked my integrity, instead saying, we have this separate issue and you and I are a team and we have to work together to identify what this issue is and solve it. Maybe it's the time management thing we talked about earlier. It's not you and your lateness versus me and my punctuality. It's us versus this problem of miscommunication about what we value. And how can we both value two different things and still feel respected in the same space? That is the question. And when it comes to relationships, like you and your spouse, for example, when my wife and I have these conversations, it is never, I feel like you do this to me. It's, I feel like we have not clearly defined what success looks like in this area. And I would really like to see us move forward in this direction.
Man,
But I want us to,
let's get real, Dante.
yeah.
Give me a heated conversation with you and your wife. What's a topic that will ruffle your feathers that she does or that she says?
Okay. I think we have two different definitions of what it means to be a good host. I find us often getting in the most conflict or arguments when our guests are coming soon, right? And she's, she wants everything to be absolutely perfect. And I'm like, they're here to see us. It's okay, right? But at the same time, she grew up in a world that taught her that as a woman, that people judge you by how clean your house is. Now, I don't think that's fair. I don't want her to feel that way. I would never judge the character of my wife based on how clean our house is. I will never come home from work and ever criticize her for dishes not being done or anything like that. If I see dishes in the sink, I'm just going to do the dishes, right? But she kind of has this value system built in that she's going to be judged by the world for this.
It's
And
a very common thing for women.
absolutely.
Because for years and years and years, they have been the caretakers of the home. And so your worth as a wife or as a mother or as a woman would be reflected in how clean your home is, or how well put together it is, or how well you cook, or how well you take care of your children. Where men historically over long periods of time, eons of time, have been breadwinners. So we place a lot of worth on how successful we are in our careers and how much we can provide for our families. And that's why a lot of times men really, really obsess about losing money, where women may not take that as hard or as personally. So just a little bit of gender dynamics here.
Yeah. And so how we go back to how do her and I come from these two very different approaches and come to a fair conclusion? It would be unfair for me as a husband to look at her and say, just stop worrying about these things, right? Because that's what we do sometimes,
But
right?
that's what I
Oh,
feel
don't worry
like.
about it.
That's
Huh?
what I feel like doing. Like, hey, it's okay if there's a few
Yep.
dishes, right? Like,
Yep.
I'm watching the game. No big deal. They'll come over.
Yep. So I firmly believe that I have to be empathetic to the fact that the world that she has perceived, she rightfully, based on her experiences, has this belief the world's going to judge her in that way, and always remind her that no matter what the world says, I put her on this pedestal above everyone else. And sometimes people are going to judge us for things that we can't control. And again, that's just a data point. It's not really a reflection of who we are. But I also want her to feel like she is doing things right. And if she feels like this is valuable, I am going to spend time working on it. And sometimes we started building systems a little bit where I'm sometimes a night owl and she can't go to bed until the dishes are done. Right. And I'm just like, look, go to bed. I promise you they'll be done when you wake up in the morning. That's my one chance. One chance. If I get that wrong, he will forever remind me that I made a promise and I didn't do it. So I'm the kind of person that will stay up late and I'll do the dishes. She'll come down and the dishes are done in the morning. And so over time, I feel like she's kind of slowly become more comfortable with going to bed while the dishes aren't done. And that's a real thing with us. Like the dishes are, that's a real conversation that happens all the time.
Oh yeah.
So
In my house, that was last night. Katie
yeah,
is taking care of our children, our house. She's also the CFO of my company. She's such a total badass.
yeah,
And and she cooked dinner for us, and she hadn't showered yet. This is dinner time. She didn't have 5 minutes to herself to shower. And I said, babe, why don't you take a shower? And she's like, but the dishes. I said, I'll do the dishes. And she had trouble trusting I was actually going to do the dishes so that she could go take a shower. This was
yep.
last night. Yeah, I did the dishes. I did them well.
Shout out to you.
I probably didn't clean the counters as thoroughly as Katie would have, though.
Yep. And I think the question has to become not you versus me, Katie versus Matt. The issue is that trust. And then you ask the question, how do we build that amount of trust to where you have the freedom to take care of yourself as you deserve to be taken care of by only you, right? No one can take care of you the way you take care of you, right? You have to. I can't take a shower for you, right? Like you have to take care of you. So how do we build a sense of trust so you have the freedom to go and do those things? And you can apply that to every relationship, personal, romantic, professional, friends, social, how, when you approach problems together, separate the problem from the relationship, make it a third party. You can give it a name. I like calling it Bertha. I don't know why. I hope I don't offend a Bertha out there, but Bertha's the problem. It's not Matt. It's not Katie. Bertha. All right. Bertha. The dishes are Bertha from now on.
Right.
How
Like,
do
Katie, just
we,
go
how
get in
do
the shower. I can't get in the shower. I got to clean the dishes. No, I'm going to help with you don't clean the counters. Oh,
Yeah,
man. Okay. Hey, this is Bertha.
that's right.
We're trying to solve a common goal here, which is getting the dishes done and you having self-care. And we're both on the same team. I will step up and clean the counters to your expectations tonight. You can trust me, but then I have to follow through on that.
Yep. Focus on building the trust.
And Dante, this has been so much fun. You're just such a wealth of knowledge, and your take on leadership is completely unique. I haven't heard the "explore fearlessly" was one of my favorite quotes of the day, and I'm going to take that with me. And if you want to learn more from Dante, we're going to send you the first 2 chapters of his best-selling book, The Transformational College Experience. You just go to goodmoodshow.com, sign up for our newsletter, or reach out on our contact page. And Dante, I'm sure there's people who are going to want to reach out to you directly. How can our listener get in touch?
Very simple. My name's hard to spell, but I'm sure it'll be on the episode. So just copy and paste Dante DiBattista. All of my socials are at Dante DiBattista. Luckily, there's not many of us, so I have the handle of just my name, and I'll have to put a number or special character. DanteDiBattista.com is my website. I'm always open. I love when people reach out to me. I'm very proud of being a person that people can approach and feel comfortable with. So please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions. I'm always happy to talk to anyone. I'm a talker, so that's why I have a podcast. Why I like going on podcast. I love talking. So giving me an opportunity to talk is a privilege.
What's the name of your podcast, Dante?
It's called The Pursuit of Self-Actualization. So it's another psychology podcast.
The Pursuit of Self-Actualization, and you're committing to 30 more episodes this year, I saw.
Yes, sir. That was a goal for this year, 30 episodes. And shout out to Ryan Cass, because Ryan would text me almost every weekend or every couple of weekends. Hey, you got an episode coming out? And I'm like, Ryan. But he's right. I set it as a goal. It's on my board. I'm looking at it right now, 30 episodes in the year, and I'm doing it.
And then I know about it because you posted it publicly that you're going to do this. That's another level of commitment. Man, it has been just an honor to have this conversation with you, and I appreciate you being here so much.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation again. I know your audience is in great hands. I love your show. I'm just as much a fan as I am a guest, and it's truly an honor and privilege. Thank you.
See you, man.
See you.